Faith is one of the most profound elements of human existence. It's what sustains individuals in their darkest moments, what gives strength to endure challenges, and what inspires acts of courage when the odds are overwhelmingly against us. But faith is not a passive concept. It's active, demanding decisions, sacrifices, and an unwavering commitment, even in the face of danger. Few stories capture this truth as vividly as the tale of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three young men who refused to bow to a false god, even when the penalty was death in a blazing furnace. To understand the gravity of this story, we must put ourselves in their shoes. Imagine living under a powerful king, one whose word was law, and whose anger could ignite not just a furnace, but the fears of an entire empire. Imagine standing before this king, knowing that one simple act, a bow, could save your life. Yet you choose to stand tall, not out of arrogance, but out of an unshakable conviction that bowing would betray your God. This is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, a story of faith under fire, quite literally. But why does this story matter to us today? We may not face literal furnaces, but the pressures to conform, to compromise, and to forsake what we believe in are just as real. The idols of our time, success, power, societal approval, may not be made of gold, but they demand our allegiance nonetheless. The question this story asks is timeless. When faced with the fire, will we stand firm? Babylon was the epitome of ancient power and splendor, known for its towering walls, advanced infrastructure, and cultural achievements. Babylon was a city unlike any other. It was here, under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar, that the empire reached its zenith. Nebuchadnezzar was not just a political leader, he was a symbol of Babylonian greatness, a king whose ambitions knew no bounds. His military campaigns had brought vast territories under his control, including the kingdom of Judah, whose people were taken into exile and forced to serve the empire. Among these exiles were three young men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These names held deep meaning in Hebrew, reflecting their faith in God. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious, Mishael means who is like God, and Azariah means the Lord helps. But upon their arrival in Babylon, these names were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, names that reflected Babylonian gods. This was not just a cultural shift, but an attempt to strip them of their identity and allegiance to their God. Despite this, the three men thrived. Their intelligence, discipline, and integrity set them apart, earning them positions of influence in the royal court. But while they served faithfully in their roles, they drew a clear line when it came to matters of worship. Like Daniel, their companion and fellow exile, they resolved to honor God above all else, even in a foreign land. This decision would soon be tested in ways they could never have anticipated. Nebuchadnezzar, in his quest to consolidate power and unify his empire, conceived a grand idea, a towering golden statue that would serve as a symbol of his authority and divine favor. Measuring 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, this statue was an awe-inspiring sight, a shimmering monument visible for miles. The king's decree was equally imposing. At the sound of the royal orchestra, everyone in the kingdom, officials, nobles, and commoners alike, was to bow and worship the image. Refusal was not an option, as the penalty was death in a fiery furnace. The day of the ceremony arrived and the plains of Dura were filled with people. The orchestra played, and as the music swelled, the crowds fell to their knees, bowing low before the golden statue. But in this sea of submission, three men remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's defiance was silent but unmistakable. To them, bowing to the statue would mean violating the commandments of their God. They could not and would not give their worship to anyone or anything other than the Lord. Their decision was not without precedent. Throughout the Bible, we see individuals who refuse to compromise their faith, even at great personal cost. Consider Joseph, who resisted the advances of Potiphar's wife, declaring, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. Or Elijah, who confronted the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, declaring, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." 1 Kings 18:21. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood in this same tradition of unwavering faith, a faith that chose obedience over safety, conviction over comfort. But their stand did not go unnoticed. Word of their defiance quickly spread, reaching the ears of Nebuchadnezzar himself. The king's initial reaction was one of disbelief. How could anyone dare to defy his command? But disbelief soon turned to rage, and the three men were summoned to appear before him. Standing before Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced the full force of the king's wrath. The atmosphere in the court was tense, the king's anger palpable, yet the three men stood calm and composed, their faith unshaken. Nebuchadnezzar, perhaps hoping to intimidate them into compliance, gave them one final chance. "Is it true," he demanded, "that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? If you are ready to fall down and worship the image, very good. But if you do not, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Daniel 3:14-15. This was a moment of decision, a crossroads where many might falter. The temptation to bow, even insincerely, must have been immense. After all, what harm could a small gesture do if it meant preserving their lives? But for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this was not merely a political or cultural issue. It was a spiritual one. Their allegiance was to the God of Israel, and no earthly power could override that. Their response was both courageous and profound. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Daniel 3:17-18. These words reveal a faith that is both confident and humble. They trusted in God's power to save them, but acknowledged his sovereignty to act according to his will. This echoes the faith of Job, who declared, "Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him." Job 13:15. It is a faith that does not demand outcomes, but rests in the assurance of God's presence and purpose. Nebuchadnezzar, however, was unmoved by their declaration. His fury reached a boiling point, and he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. This wasn't just a display of anger. It was a calculated act meant to intimidate anyone who might think of defying him. The heat was so intense that the soldiers tasked with throwing the three men into the fire perished before completing their task. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bound and cast into the flames, the crowd watched in silence, expecting the men to be consumed instantly. But what happened next defied all expectations. The furnace stood as a symbol of absolute power and unrelenting fury. Nebuchadnezzar had commanded it to be heated 7 times hotter than normal, an order driven by his uncontrollable anger. The air around the furnace shimmered with intense heat, distorting the surroundings as flames leapt higher and higher, consuming the wood and coal that fueled its blaze. For the soldiers tasked with executing the king's command, the furnace was already deadly. As they carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to its edge, the searing heat overwhelmed them, and they collapsed, succumbing to its intensity before they could even complete their task. The sight of the soldiers falling victim to the flames must have sent a wave of fear through the onlookers. The furnace was no empty threat. It was a monstrous reality, a fiery beast that consumed without mercy. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bound hand and foot, the fire represented everything Nebuchadnezzar wanted it to be: a tool of terror, a weapon of domination, and a force that no one could oppose. But their faces showed no fear. These three men, resolute in their faith, knew that their lives were in the hands of a power far greater than the furnace, greater even than the king who had condemned them. The crowd watched in silence as the three men were cast into the fire, their bodies disappearing into the flames. For many, this would have been the end of the story. Fire is final, a force that consumes and destroys. To the human eye, survival was impossible. But God was about to intervene in a way that would defy all logic and demonstrate his unmatched power. Nebuchadnezzar, seated at a safe distance, watched with satisfaction as the men were thrown into the furnace. His fury had driven him to this moment, and now he expected the fire to do its work. But as the seconds passed, his expression began to change. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Something was not right. The flames were still raging, yet the scene inside the furnace was not what it should have been. "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" Nebuchadnezzar asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The officials around him nodded, confirming what they all knew to be true. But the king's next words sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Daniel 3:24-25. Inside the furnace, the impossible was happening. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were no longer bound. The flames that had consumed the ropes tying them had left their bodies completely unharmed. Not only were they alive, but they were walking freely within the fire. And with them was a 4th figure, one whose presence radiated a divine majesty. Nebuchadnezzar's description of this figure as a son of the gods reflects his limited understanding, but it also acknowledges the supernatural nature of what he was witnessing. Many biblical scholars interpret this 4th figure as a theophany, a manifestation of God himself, or as an angel sent to protect his faithful servants. This moment was not just a miracle, it was a profound revelation of God's character. The presence of the 4th figure demonstrated that God does not abandon his people in their trials. Instead, he walks with them through the fire. This theme is echoed throughout Scripture. In Isaiah 43:2, God promises, "When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." In Psalm 34:17-18, we read, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles." The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. These verses remind us that God's presence is not contingent on the absence of difficulty, but is most evident in the midst of it. The image of 4 figures walking in the flames also carries symbolic weight. The fire, meant to be an instrument of destruction, became a stage for God's glory. The same flames that had consumed the soldiers had no power over Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This was not just a display of divine protection, it was a statement of God's sovereignty over all creation. The fire obeyed him, just as the winds and waves obeyed Jesus when he calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Mark 4:39. For the onlookers, the sight must have been both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The furnace, which had symbolized Nebuchadnezzar's absolute authority, was now a testament to a power far greater than his own. The crowd, which had gathered expecting to witness a brutal execution, was instead witnessing a divine encounter. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of what they were seeing, a moment that would be remembered for generations. Nebuchadnezzar, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed, approached the furnace and called out to the 3 men. His voice, once filled with anger and defiance, was now marked by humility and respect. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." Daniel 3:26. The title Most High God was a significant acknowledgement. In Babylon, where countless gods were worshipped, Nebuchadnezzar was now recognizing the supremacy of the God of Israel. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the furnace, the crowd could hardly believe their eyes. Not only were they unharmed, but their clothes were intact, and not a single hair on their heads was singed. Even the smell of smoke, which clings to anything near a fire, was absent. Their deliverance was total and complete, a testament to God's ability to protect his people in every way. This miracle was more than an act of preservation. It was a demonstration of God's power to overturn the forces of destruction. Just as he had parted the Red Sea to deliver the Israelites from Pharaoh's army, Exodus 14:21-22, he now used the flames to reveal his glory. The fire, which had been meant to destroy, became a tool in God's hands to display his sovereignty. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction was one of awe and reverence. He addressed the crowd declaring, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own." Daniel 3:28. His words were a recognition of the faith and courage of these 3 men, as well as an acknowledgement of the power of their God. The furnace, once a symbol of terror, had become a testament to faith, courage, and divine intervention. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, This was not just a moment of deliverance. It was a profound encounter with the God they had trusted their lives to. Their willingness to stand firm in the face of death had not only preserved their lives, but also revealed the glory of God to an entire nation. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the furnace, the crowd was astonished. They had expected ashes, but instead they saw three men walking confidently, their expressions calm and resolute. The most remarkable detail was that not a single hair on their heads was singed. Their clothes were intact, and they didn't even smell of smoke. The fire, which had consumed the soldiers who threw them in, had left them completely untouched. This moment was more than a rescue. It was a divine statement. God had not only preserved their lives, but had also demonstrated his ability to protect them fully and completely. This was a miracle that left no room for doubt. The thoroughness of their deliverance mirrored the way God often works in the lives of his people. When he delivers, it is not partial or incomplete. It is absolute. Consider the parting of the Red Sea, where the Israelites crossed on dry ground, and the waters returned only after they had safely passed. Exodus 14:21-31. Or think of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, where his command brought instant peace. Mark 4:39. Nebuchadnezzar, who had initially mocked their God, now stood in awe. His perspective had been transformed by what he had witnessed. Addressing the crowd, he declared, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Daniel 3:28. This declaration was significant, coming from a man who had earlier demanded worship of his own statue. Nebuchadnezzar's words were not just an acknowledgement of the miracle, but also a recognition of the faith and courage of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their willingness to face death rather than compromise their beliefs had not only saved them, but also revealed the power of their God to an entire empire. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is not merely a historical account. It is a timeless lesson in faith, courage, and the sovereignty of God. Their refusal to bow, even under the threat of death, demonstrates the kind of faith that stands firm regardless of circumstances. It is a faith that does not demand deliverance but trusts in God's will, whether that means rescue or sacrifice. For Nebuchadnezzar, this event was a turning point. While he did not fully embrace the God of Israel, his proclamation marked a significant shift in his understanding of divine power. The God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was not like the idols of Babylon, silent and powerless. He was a living, active, and sovereign God who intervenes in the lives of his people. For us today, their story serves as a source of inspiration and challenge. It reminds us that true faith is not about avoiding trials, but about trusting God in the midst of them. The flames of life may be real, but so is the presence of God. As Isaiah 41:10 reassures us, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand."